This is Agronomy Moment. I'm Wendell Cohen.
Okie dokie, we are online. This time, denitrification of the soil. Brief deep dive, if we can keep it brief. We want to talk about why we lose nitrogen, what we cannot control and what we can control, how we can implement good practices. And the reason I feel this one here is going to be a little different than what we've done in the past is we are actually going to dive a little deeper into some of the whys, because I think it's going to help us come and understand, for the lack of better terminology, of which poison we're going to pick when it comes to springtime nitrogen management, because we have to understand is this one here's a very difficult one to manage, right? Mm-hmm. And so we lose nitrogen in a variety of ways, and there is no way known to the mankind on how you can save the nitrogen, make it available to the plant at the right time, and not lose any. Mm-hmm. The tendency is that when it becomes vulnerable to loss, it becomes available to the plant in some form. So the factors that directly relate to nitrogen loss, by the way, look at that picture of the root system inside that cage. That's a
Did you do that?
No, I wish. Beck's what how does that say?
What?
Beck's Practical Farm Research did this last year, and I'm actually wanting to do this. We could do this ourselves.
Let's do it.
I can get those cages, I think. I can find and buy them. And then we can plant like what they did. And all I need to do is find that little tiny pea gravel or whatever.
The substrate.
The substrate. And I think we could do it ourselves. But anyway, what were we talking about?
We were wondering why our podcast goes so long.
Sorry. The pH of the soil directly correlates to this. More acidic soils reduce your nitrogen loss, and more alkaline soils, the opposite. Temperature, lower temperatures, we know, reduces nitrogen loss, and as your temps increase, it increases in loss to a certain point. Water content of the soil, we measure this, or a lot of times you'll find research, and what I've found is measured in percent of water-filled pore space, meaning saturated soils, we lose more nitrogen, and as we dry out, in loss is reduced. pH in acidic soils, smaller amounts of carbon and mineral nitrogen are available to the population that denitrifies your soil. So keeping 7.0 and below would be a good place to be as it relates to nitrogen loss.
Yes. And the corn crop.
And the corn crop, meaning...
So...
In soybeans, your pH could be a little higher.
Yeah, but... Yes. So in soybeans generally are better atmosphere for growth is a little bit higher of a pH than thinking of as our corn crop. But specifically talking about nitrogen before we stray too far on pHs.
And then your temperature, those enzymes that are very active in denitrification really ramp up as we get into the temperatures that we would call optimum plant temperatures. So, your 50s plus, your 60s, your 70s, and then you'll see those enzymes slow back down as you get up in really hot temps, but then your plant does as well. So last thing we talked about before is saturated soils. Anaerobic bacteria uses nitrate, and it ramps up its activity as we reduce oxygen in the soil. As oxygen is reduced, anaerobic bacteria spikes. So you'll see, you're gassing off your volatility of the nitrogen, your nitrate levels. So like we talked, keeping soils below your 7.1 temperature, I don't really know if there's a lot to say on it, right?
It's hard on specifically relating to soil temperatures, what you're thinking, right?
Yeah, I mean, how are we going to do this with corn crop?
It's difficult because like you said at the beginning of the presentation, most generally speaking, we see some
Yeah.
sort of tillage,
Yeah.
and which is going to naturally harm the soils. So, and getting into that, naturally warming the soils is going to naturally lead to our losses because of our losses increasing with a higher temperature. So, kind of hard to, we think about cover crops, the things we do to help our soil temperatures and retain either moisture or that temperature is cover crops and no-till situations. But again, being a dead horse there, we just don't see that as much on the corn rotation.
Right. And so knowing, let's see how cold we can plant our corn into, said no one ever, right? Water filled pore space of the soil. I feel like this is probably the one thing we can do. It's not easy, but we can do it. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we can do and why it's a good idea. We can amend the soil mechanically, sometimes biologically. Mechanically seems to be a little more certain what you can do. Biologically, we don't always know what amendments have really made a big impact or what has made the biggest impact. Water, internal drainage options, we talk about tiling, ripping, using a conservation approach. You could do inline ripping, fractured your soil layers, helps water infiltration, right? So we don't get that ponding effect on the surface.
Right.
UGOs, strategically placing, your tile drains and so on. Surface drainage options like waterways, terraces, diversion ditches. And then we have biological, again, composition. You can do gypsum, you can do different things that alter your soil, help make it more. There's lots of products out there that are being sold left, right, and center. How much they do, some of them, can be a challenge. Anything you want to put into this?
No, I think summary will probably catch
Yep.
whenever we kind of discover talk about all of it.
In addition to water management, let's talk about the nitrogen management application. Right, risk mitigation is a good way to mitigate the risk is to budget for more than one trip. Don't throw everything in one trip, especially when you got coarse soils. The coarser your soils, more sandier, so on, the less holding capacity they have for ammonium. Be flexible with your spring weather. You see a lot of rain. The good thing about more than one trip is you're not broken the budget yet. Mm-hmm. You have dry powder still in your pocket. And then you got multiple nitrogen sources. I like to say we can pick and choose what's most logistically feasible for us and use more than one source. And hydrous has a place, but if it's not logistically feasible for you, it's a dangerous product, choose another two. Mm-hmm. Choose what works best for your operation, but try not to rely on one. I think would be my key takeaway here.
Yeah, not relying on one specifically, and more specifically, not relying on just one with the one trip. I think that's being able to split that risk and being able to kind of feed that corn when we think about the corn's needs and its nitrogen uptake. Pretty crucial in being able to get that nitrogen out there and have that nitrogen out there as much as we can control.
Yep. The last thing we can talk about is inhibitors, but again, we need to be careful with what we're dealing with here because, first of all, they slow loss, and so if you're in springtime, getting your money back on those expensive inhibitors is probably not going to be money well spent. Also, beware they're going to reduce your biological activity. You're going to cut down on the very things, the enzymes and bacteria that help promote availability to your plant. In summary, let's talk a little bit, and maybe you weigh in on this one, Celena, is when we are talking about nitrogen management, water management, why is it that we want to get water away from the soil? And in my opinion, anyway, I think it's a good idea.
You're getting water away because whenever we think about a potential for biggest losses is going to be a leaching situation and saturated soils.
Okay. Yes.
So it's specifically in this situation talking about more of the saturated soils, and specifically a lot of those losses as it relates to probably more of a heavier
Yep.
a soil type rather than a coarse soil type. But being able to get that waterway, have good permeability through the soil, and not have that ponding, the saturation happening, because when that happens, and losing the oxygen in the soil, we're setting ourselves up for the potential of a lot of nitrogen loss.
And when we can lose some nitrogen through leaching. And so in other words, you put UGO drains in and stuff, water, if there's nitrogen running across the soil, and nitrate forming is no longer, the cations it's no longer a positive charge. And so it's susceptible to loss, right? It's at risk for loss through leaching, through getting waterway. However, if we don't get that water off, we open up a whole nother can of worms, if you will, to problems. And so getting the waterway, even if you lose some through leaching, we're still able to manage the crop's nitrogen needs much, much better by getting water off faster. Did you make a comment on what Iowa's was talking about, how fast water gets off, and how it's substantial loss that occur as you start to get ponding?
Yes, difficult to predict and put a number on, but the losses due to the ponding of water or the saturated soils can be extremely substantial.
Yes,
due to the nitrogen loss, essentially. So I think, kind of big picture here, what we're really trying to get at is how are we going to manage the water that we hopefully get, actually.
Yes, right, and it will. Sooner or later, Missouri will rain.
Yeah.
I don't know what year.
So being able to have those practices in place where we can get the water away to where we're not dealing with an extreme.
Yes.
We're not dealing with that extreme saturation.
Yes.
Ponding situations like that, where we're able to capitalize more on our nitrogen management and our nitrogen investment into our corn crop.
And so I think, to add to that, I think one piece of research said that when everything aligns and you have saturated soils above 60%, and you have temperatures that are warm, and your pH is slightly alkaline, they have seen 80% nitrogen loss of applied nitrogen that has been applied lost in 5 days, which is huge. I don't know that we get into those conditions all the time very much,
Right.
but I do think we do see those in micro situations of terrace channels and bottom ground situations. We do see those. So the other thing we get into as we wrap up here is to mention is we also get soils that are anaerobic, right? We start losing oxygen, which starts to kill off plant roots and reduces health of plants, and disease begins to spike. And we get so many problems that I feel like that even though, yes, we're going to face nitrogen loss no matter which way we cut this, I feel like I would rather fight the battle of leaching and losing some, I quote some, of that nitrogen and deal with that than I would having ponding. So this time of year, if you're watching this in the winter time and this is still, you got fields that are dry, go out and find your spots where you believe water will pond. Utilize conservation programs and terraces and UGOs and figure out ways to get water to get out of your fields faster. The quicker you can, the better off in the long run. And then if we get the leaching, we can respond to that by an application of nitrogen. There will be a quick nitrification process then, because you've got oxygen in the soils and your plant will respond quicker. It can be, that top dress app is expensive, but it can be huge in your yield if your corn responds quickly to that.
Absolutely.
So we wrap this up and we are done with our nitrogen deep dive. Hopefully it was brief enough for us. And anything before we go?
I think so.
Everyone, thanks for watching this podcast. See you.
If you want alerts on what we are finding in the field, go to Top Ag Services agronomist.com/signups to receive alert, or subscribe to our YouTube channel. It is our goal to bring you the most recent and advanced information possible. If you have any questions or feedback, feel free to reach out to us anytime. We also ask you that you give us a like and follow our channel wherever you listen to your podcasts or watch these videos. This ultimately helps us reach more people like you.
Hello?
Hey, this has been Wendell Cohn, your show host. Thank you to all who made this show possible. This show is over. See ya.